Hello and welcome. In this lecture we are on version 2.83 beta now, the almost latest version during the recording of this video. Most important for this course is that there are some minor interface updates, and maybe I already re-recorded previous recordings with this version, so it could be okay. But just so you know, let's continue with the grass particle. Probably not visible when rendering, but there's a cross visible on our model. We can fix that by erasing the bottom pixels in that texture. So with a small brush, hit N and look at the tools. There, go to the stroke method and set it on line. And that should fix most of the cross. Sometimes there's just a little bit hanging there. So let's do it again. Let's erase a few more pixels. Is it gone now? Almost. It's not visible in render mode. It has something to do, I think, with the way Blender tiles textures. But in render mode you don't see anything, so we're fine. Okay. Good, let's put the blend mode back on mix, strength on 0.7 and pressure sensitivity on. Now let's first go to the default layout. We have our 3D view here. Let's put the render mode on preview, material preview. Make sure we're not on local mode anymore. Now in the outliner, the well is not visible. We can click on the eye here to make it visible again. So we can turn it on here, or we can go to the viewport and hit Alt-H. I'm not sure if I told this before, but in the outliner we can see all the objects in the scene. We can turn the visibility on or off. You can also click and drag on an eye to make multiple objects visible or invisible. All these objects are in a collection. So collection are like folders in the Windows Explorer or macOS Finder. You can put your objects in a collection and you can rename the collection by hitting F2 and then typing in a new name. Let's call this one lights and camera, and then let's put the camera and light in there. The sun lamp. Now you can turn these collections on or off, or you can hide them. Turn the collection off makes it as if the objects in there are just not there at all, so they won't be rendered, and that's a little bit different than turning the visibility on or off. But more about that later. Now let's give the first collection a name as well. Let's call it models. So now in the model collection we have the well and the plane. What is that? Oh sure, that was the grass particle. That's the one we're working on right now. So let's rename this one as well. Hit F2 or click and then double click on this model here. So select and then double click. And I name the grass particle. Particle. Enter. So what have we got here? We have this grass particle. Let's grab that and move it down a bit. So hit G, Z to constrain on the Z axis and drag it down. So now it's below the well. Now let's add a plane that will be the emitter for the grass particles and the floor plane the well stands on. So first thing we'll need to do is make sure the cursor is in the middle. So hit Shift S and cursor to world origin. Then Shift A and click mesh and add a plane. Now click tab to go to edit mode. Then hit S to scale 5 on a numpad to make it 5 times bigger. Then make sure the name is correct. So click, double click, floor plane and hit enter. And while we're still in edit mode, we will use the vertex select mode by clicking on this button here or hitting 1 on the one that's not on your numpad but the other one. Now we want to add some loop cuts on this plane. We can do that by clicking on the right mouse button with everything selected, subdivide. And it will subdivide every edge on this plane into 2. Let's go to top view and then deselect everything and then select every corner vertex. So with the left mouse button click on one and with shift a left click on the other ones. Now hit S to scale and scale them in until you have a sort of round shape. So not like this and not like this, but like this. Now let's subdivide this a little bit more so we can give a nicer shape to it later on. So select all and right mouse button and again hit subdivide. Now we subdivided it once, but I'd like to give it more cuts. So put it on 3 here and hit enter. Is this enough? Let's have a look around. I can use a little bit more, so let's make this 4. The floor plane is a little bit flat, so let's give it some depth. Hit Alt-A to deselect everything and select the vertices on the edge. We do it by Alt-clicking near an edge, like so. Now with Shift Alt-click on another edge. Don't click on the vertices, but click on a point in between two vertices. Remember how to extrude? Hit E to extrude, Z to constrain on the Z axis, and then drag a little bit down, like so, until we are at about 1 unit, -1 unit, something like this. Now I want to hide part of this again, so hit Ctrl+ first. That'll add one edge to the selection, and then hit H to hide. The reason for hiding this will become clear later. Let's find the front first, so let's hit one numpad and drag around so we know that this is the front of the well. Now select one pixel in the back, this one for example, and then we turn on proportional editing by hitting O. When proportional editing is turned on, you can manipulate or transform vertices that are near the vertex you have selected. So for example, the vertex here selected now, I'm going to transform it with proportional editing turned on. The vertices around it will also be transformed. It will use a fall off that you can choose here. So it's kind of like a brush. You have a sharp fall off or a linear fall off, smooth, etc. So let's keep it on smooth for now. And let's try this. Hit G to move, Z to constrain around the Z axis and move up. Now only or almost only the vertex you have selected is moved. The other one I moved a little bit, but not that much. Scroll up with your mouse wheel to increase the proportional editing and down to decrease the proportional editing. So now only this vertex moves, and when I scroll the mouse wheel up, you see that circle grows bigger. That's the influence. And then when the smooth fall off, which we selected, everything around it moves as well. I'll make the influence a little bit smaller and drag it up. So not down, but up, something like this. And that way you made a nice smooth bump in a floor plane. That's less boring than what we had before, right? Just a flat floor plane is just a flat floor plane. Adding small bumps just makes it a little bit nicer. So let's do another one. Let's do it here. G and Z to constrain on the Z axis and move up. Maybe a little bit more influence, something like this. And the reason why I hit, past tense for height, part of this plane is because when I unhide it now, you see we didn't influence the edge. That's what I wanted. I wanted to have the edge straight and not influenced by the proportional transformation. Don't forget to turn off proportional editing by clicking here or hitting O. Now go out of edit mode and with the right mouse button choose Shade Smooth. It doesn't change anything to the vertices or to the mesh, but it visually smooths out the sharp edges. It looks a little bit fluffy or strange, but it will look better when we have a texture on it. That's enough modeling on the floor plane. Now we will use this floor plane as an emitter for the grass particles. I'll make these tools a little bit bigger so we can read it a little bit better. So let's click on this one. That is the particle tab. Hit plus to make a new particle system, and in there we have a particle settings, and we'll give that setting a new name. How about grass particles? Grass particles. And see, the particles already showed up. There we have them. Let's name the particle system as well. Grass system. So now we have a grass system, and in there we have a grass particle settings. We can have more particle systems on one mesh. And we can reuse particle settings in different systems, so we can have two systems with the same particle setting. That's why we do it like this. A little bit difficult maybe to understand, but okay, let's continue. Emitter. The type is on emitter. You have a type called hair as well. That's for hair. You see hair. Okay, emitter. That's what we need now. Emission. Let's have a look at emission. The number of particles emitted is 1000. That might be a little bit too much. So let's put it on 500. Then we have the seed, and that's a little bit hard to explain, but the seed is the randomness or a random way of emitting the particles. So this is seed 0, and then it emits the particles randomly like this. And when I put it on 1, it's just another randomness. It's another shape. Okay, let's put it back on 0. Doesn't really matter where it's on. Now frame start, we can leave that at 1, but frame end should be at 1 as well. And what does this mean? And let me show you the timeline here. So at 1 on the timeline, this should be on 1. On 1, all the particles will be emitted at the same time. Let me explain a little bit about this timeline. So this timeline is used for animation. When you hit play, the viewport shows the frames after each other. It's the same as with film. When you show a lot of pictures fast after each other, it creates the illusion of a moving object. The same happens here. So you have frame 1, 2, 3. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see the separate frames. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And kind of the same happens with the particles. When you emit them over a period of time, they appear to be flowing into the scene, but we want them all in the scene at once. So that's why we have frame start at 1 and frame end at 1 as well. So for example, if I put the end at 50 and I would hit play now, there is 1 at frame 1. And when you move along, you'll see them flowing into the scene and falling down because gravity is on as well. But we want them all at once and then stay there for a while. And that's what the lifetime is for. So if you have the lifetime at 50, for example, or if you just don't play the animation, the particles will stay at the same position for 50 frames. And then they'll disappear. Lifetime randomness, you can randomize the lifetime. Now let's look at the source. That's where the particles are emitted from. So we have verts. That makes the particles emit from the vertices. So I have to tap in and out. Now they only emit from the vertices of the mesh. But we want faces because we want to have them emitted from a random place on the mesh. You can also choose volume. A volume is when you have a closed volume, a closed mesh, then the particles will also emit from the inside of the mesh. Let's keep this on faces. We have some more options here. Best I'll just click them on and off and see what they do. This is random order. And this is even distribution. I'll go to the top view, you see it a little bit better then. Then we have here jittered and random. Random is more cropped together, I guess. Grid, that is following a grid. As you can set here, resolution on the resolution. Let's keep it on jittered. Particles per phase, you can choose how many particles are emitted from one phase. It's on 0, that's unlimited. You can also turn it up. So for example 1, and then you have 1 particle per phase. Jittering amount, you can play with that and modify a stack. I never used that. So let's skip that. Let's close this. Let's go to cache, the next tab. Cache is used to store animation. We're not going to do that, so skip that. Then velocity. The only thing we need to do now at this moment is look at the normal. It's on 1 meter per second. What that does is, let's zoom in. At the start of the animation, the particles will have a speed of 1 meter per second. And the direction is away, so perpendicular to the face where it's on. So you see here there's just a little offset. When you put it on 0, the particle is exactly in the center of the face. Or the face is exactly in the center of the particle. You move it up, you see it moves away perpendicular from the face it's on. Let's put it on 0 because we want the grass particles to be exactly on the plane and not just a little bit away from it. Let's all be changed in velocity now. The rest in velocity we'll use later in this lecture, so we can close this tab and continue. Rotation is something we will use later as well, so skip that. Physics is on Newtonian. You can close it because the rest we won't use now. Now render, that's something we can play with. So let's first look at show emitter. That's this tick box here. If you turn it off, the emitter, so the floor plane, will not be shown in the render. But we will use the floor plane so we can turn it on again. Then on the render as, we can change the particles to be rendered as none, so we see nothing. And down here again. To halo, then we see these balls again, halo balls. Line, this should show lines, but that doesn't do anything now. Then path and object, that's the one we need. So instance object, that should be our grass particle. And what do we see? All these sweet tiny grass particles. So what should we do? We should make them a little bit bigger. And the default size is 0.05. I don't know why it's that small, but let's put it on 1. That makes more sense to me. Now it's the same size as the original particle. That's a little bit too big, so let's make that 0.5, half the size of the original particle. Now when we click on this button here, that show overlays or hide overlays, we can show or hide the overlays. We do that because we can hardly see the particles through the selection. Now they all have the same size, so let's use scale randomness to get a random scale. Maybe 0.7 is better. Yep, 0.5. Okay, that's what I like. Object rotation aligns the particle's rotation with the original object's rotation. The global X rotation, if I'm not mistaken. Turn it on, because we will use that in the rotation part that follows. Look at all the particles, they all have the same rotation, they all are pointing in the same direction. They're also all pointing straight up, so let's make some variation in that. Let's go up here and go to the rotation here and turn it on. It is on velocity here now. And let's put it on normal and see what that does. So now all the particles are aligned with the faces. They're in fact aligned with the normal, but because the rotation is off, their angle is perpendicular to the normal. So the normal is pointing that way, so always away from the face. But grass grows straight up. It's not growing perpendicular to the face it's standing on the floor. So let's change that. Let's change it from normal to, let's look, global Z or object Z. Now that might look correct, but it's not, because when you rotate an emitter, the grass would also rotate with it. That's not what happens in real life. So let's put it on global Z. Global Z is the axis we have here, and it's always pointing up. Now we are in global Z and still all the particles are falling down. We have a solution for that, and that is rotating the original object. We could also choose another angle, but there's a reason for that, and I'll show that later. So let's first rotate the original object. So let's select it. I see nothing, and that's because the overlays are still turned off, so let's turn them on. Now we see our object, and I see when I rotate it with R, you see all the particles moving with it. So let's rotate it around the y-axis and choose 90 degrees on a numpad. And now they're all standing up. Yay! Let's do it from a different angle as well. Control Z and do it again. This one's standing up. We have it selected. We hit R, Y to constrain around the Z-axis, 90 degrees, and plop, they're all standing up. The original parting is now pointing sideways, but that's not a problem, because we can move it out of view and even hide it later on. But let's first move it out of view, like so. Now why did I do it like this? Let's first select the emitter again. Now I'm going to give the emitter a color, because I think it's a little bit too white and it's playing with my eyes. So I go to material, add a new material and make that dark green. It's just a temporary color, no worries. Okay, so why did I rotate the particle like this? Why did I put it on global Z and not a different way? That's because I want to make sure that every particle, and let's first go to top view because I can't see anything. Oh, and wireframe. So click on this one. And you can see all the particles have the same direction. I would like to have them all in a different direction. So now I can go to face here in rotation and then start dancing around. But what's underneath there is a random face button. So let's use that and look. Whee! They're all getting their own direction, their own angle. Very nice, that's what I want. So now we have the Z up. We have them all rotated in a different direction. And the last one I want to do is to have them all slanted or falling down in a slightly randomized direction as well. So here we have another random option. That is to randomize the orientation. That's the global Z random option. So it's pointing upwards, but then randomized as well. And then we can just randomize them, not too much because else the side will be sticking out again. That part there. So something like this. Now I want to have an influence of where the particles emit. So at some parts I don't want any particles at all, and in some parts I want them smaller. So, for example, here in the middle of the well, where the well itself is, I don't want any particles. We can influence the particles while using a texture, an influence texture. Now there are other methods, like weight painting, but as far as I know, I can export to other applications like Unreal Editor or Unity, for example. So all the way down at the Particles tab, we find Textures. Open up that tab and scroll down a bit. Make a new texture. And of course, give it a name. Let's name it Grass Influence, because the mask, the texture is a mask we are making, is going to influence the grass texture. Now the button here is the same as going to the texture tab here. That's just for your convenience there. So let's click on the button there. Now we have all sorts of textures here. The cross system where it's on, the brush mask, and with the little sparks here, the arrows, dot with arrows, that's the cross system. There we have a cross influence texture slot, and here we need to make a new texture. We can do that there, or we can go to the texture paint layout. So click here, texture paint. We know this one. And here when we click this away, we have an empty slot. Then we can make a new texture. It's the same as when I would do it on the right. Let's give it a new name. T for texture underscore cross influence underscore M for mask. It can be a tiny texture, so make it 256 by 256 pixels. That's enough for a mask, we don't need that much detail there. Let's make it white, turn alpha off and hit OK. Now we have a small white texture, and white says all particles go here, black says no particles. Then we go back to the textures tab here from the particle system, and then we choose the texture we just made. So we could have made it here as well, but just to know what we're doing and have it in view, I'd like to make it in the texture slot in the texture paint layout. In the texture tab we have two mappings. This is not the one we need the second one, so under influence there's not a mapping here. The coordinates, set it on UV because we'll use a UV map to project the texture on the model. So make sure the floor plane is selected, and with that selected we will go to edit mode, then we'll select all, hit U and choose UV unwrap. Now there's a UV map, and then under map here we choose the map we just made. Now above mapping there's influence, open that, and general time we can turn it off because we don't want to influence time, we want to influence size and density. Now we use both of them, so size and density, because later on when we convert the particles into real objects, and I know that sounds a bit complicated, but I'll explain that a little bit later. So when you convert the particles to real objects, you get an empty object, and that's why we also choose density next to size. Now the floor plane is pink, and do you remember why? Yes, indeed, we don't have any texture attached to this model. Let's fix that. Let's go to shading. I'll zoom out a bit because we are at end level. Okay, the floor plane has a green color. We did that before in the materials tab. So we see that back in the shader here, but it doesn't have any texture attached to it. So use Shift A. So let's go to texture, choose image texture, connect color to the base color and zoom in. And now we'll choose the cross influence texture. So now the floor plane turns white, and that is correct. Because when we go back to texture paint, you see this white is the same white as we use in the texture here. Now this texture is not the texture we'll use in the end for the base color, but we use it now so we can see where we are painting, when we are painting in the influence for the cross particles. So the texture is all white, and white means that both the density and the size, the ones we checked in the influence, will be 100%. So now we can paint on the object itself, or we can paint on the texture. So let's first paint on the texture. Let's make sure we are in paint mode. And open the tool shelf, and let's make a new brush. Let's click on this copy button here. Let's change the name. It's a little bit hard like this, so let's make this bigger. So, and let's give it a name, and let's name it, let's call it particle brush. Hit enter. Now the primary color should be black and the secondary color white. And let's make sure it's on space and not on line. Just want to paint freely. Close stroke and then go to fall off. And let's make a different sort of fall off. Let's drag this one all the way to the left. And then add a point here. Let's put the first one on about 25% in. Something like this. And then drag this down a bit. So what happens now is in the center we'll have 100% color, and then we have a fall off until white. Nothingness. Okay, so this is the center and this is to the side of the brush, remember? Let's hide the tools with N, and what's a bit of a problem now is that because we have a white texture we can't see our brush anymore. We can fix that by changing the color of the brush, so drag all the way here to brush tip, cursor color, and set that on red for example. And now when we go over the white parts we have a red brush shape, so we can still see what we're doing. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll change the influence at the base of the well, because we don't need any particles where the well itself is, this part. So what we'll do in the center here, we'll draw in some blackness, and black means no particles. We don't see it here now, but when we tap in and out of edit mode, we'll see, you see the particles are now gone. So our system is working. Next thing I want to do is round the edge here. I want no particles there, or maybe some small ones. So let's go back to edit mode so we can see the UVs. Now we can draw this in freely, or we can use lines. Let's make the brush a little bit smaller first. So the line method may be a little bit faster. So we can open up the toolbox and set the stroke on line instead of space, but there's another method, and that is using the E key when we are hovering over the texture. So let's first hide the toolbox again, and then hit E, and then here choose line. And now we can draw in lines. Make sure the strength is on 1 and pressure sensitivity is turned off. Da-di-da, da-di-da, and let's draw in these black lines. Pretty fast, right? Let's draw all around the edge. So now the sides are black and we have a nice fall off around the edge here. Let's see if it works. That looks pretty good. There's some tiny ones sticking over the edge, but that's okay. That looks pretty normal to me. Now let's hit E and put it back on space. And let's make the center a little bit darker, because there might be some tiny particles still popping up there. Let's see one sticking inside of the well here. Let's see if we can fix that. Let's go on texture paint. Oh, it's already gone. Really? Yes. Okay, that looks good. There's now nothing sticking out of the well or into the well. Let's go back to object mode. Let's turn the overlays off. That's cool. I really like it. Now if you remember, someone walked up to this well and threw a bucket in here, and probably did that a lot of times. So let's hit 1 on the numpad to know where the front is. Because on the front I want to make a path. And remember, when painting you always need to have a story. You need to have a reference and a story. And this will add to the story. So let's do this on the model itself. So let's first go to texture paint. We have to correct texture here because that's what we see. Then make the brush a little bit bigger, and here we'll draw in a small path. Well, that's a little bit too small, so let's make the brush a lot bigger, and let's just draw it in a couple of times. Doesn't have to be straight, doesn't have to be perfect. It's a path. Someone walked in there. It's not something made with a ruler. Tap twice to go in and out of edit mode to make the influence do its job. Something like this, maybe make the corners a little bit rounder. Okay, now let's turn off the image texture again. The influence texture here on the well. So go to shading and just release this one from the base color. And it's green again. Let's make the roughness 100%, so it's not that shiny. It's not a finer material, but it's just so you have an idea of what it will look like when it's green. I'd like to use a lot more particles, so let's crank up the number of particles to 1000, but be careful because most game engines can handle it, but Blender might crash if you crank this up too high. Now let's save this texture. Let's do image and save, and it pops up outside of my window, so let's drag it back in here. I'm in the correct folder, the name is correct, so let's just hit save. Where is my texture? There. Okay, so we created these particles, we influence them by using a texture. Now we need to convert these particles into real objects. And that is because this particle system only works in Blender itself. It does not work in Unity, in Unreal Engine, or on websites like Sketchfab, for example. So that's why we have to convert this particle system into a mesh. So let's first go to the default layout. Now go to the modifier tab, that's the one with the wrench here. And here, convert, just click on that and it will convert all the particles into meshes. And we had 1000 particles, so now we have 1000 meshes here. That's a little bit too much, right? So let's do something about that. I'd like to have them all in one collection first, so let's first do Ctrl Z to undo the conversion. Let's check if they're gone. Yes. Okay. Now let's drag this up again. Before we convert, let's make a new collection. Call this collection Grass Particles. Why not? Now let's select the grass system here, and I don't see anything. That's because we have the overlays turned off. So let's turn it on first. Now we see the selection. We have the grass system selected and dragged it into the grass particles collection. Now a little trick, add an A before grass system. This will put it on top of the list when we convert all the grass particles, because you know A is the first letter in the alphabet and it comes before the G from grass particle. So now when I hit convert, the grass system is on top of this list, and else it would be on the bottom. So now we can drag it out and drag it into the models collection again, like so. And now let's hide this grass system. That way we can focus on the grass particles. Now we can select all the particles by going to the grass particle collection, right click on it, and then choose Select Objects. Now it selects all the grass particles. None is active, so with Shift, click on one of the grass particles, it doesn't matter which. And now with Ctrl J, we can join them and turn them or convert them into one mesh. But we bump into a problem. And that kind of makes sense because let's do Ctrl Z first. All these grass particles are linked together, they have the same mesh. So grass particle 1 has a mesh called plane.001. Same goes for grass particle 2, 3, 4. They all share the same mesh. Let's fix this. Let's go to Object in this menu here. Now scroll down and here on the relations, choose Make Single User and there select Object and Data. I'll keep it open for a while so you can see which options to choose. And now here in this operator panel, you can see what we did. Don't choose material or object animation, because if you choose material, for example, all the particles will have its own materials. So we will have 1000 materials and we don't need that. They can all share the same material, the grass particle texture. Now you can check in the outliner, all the particles have their own mesh. So that's what we wanted. So we succeeded. Let's close these. And now we can hit Ctrl J and look at that. We have one object and one mesh in there. Now hit F2 and let's change the name, grass particle. You see, this is just one mesh. Nice. Unhide the floor plane and delete the A here. And let's rename the original grass particle object grass particle. Like so, because it changed its name because we had duplicate names somewhere during this process. Okay, so let's see. We have the original grass system still there. Don't delete it, hide it with this button here. And we do that because maybe later on we will want to change our particle system, and then we can still do that. Now let's save our project and let's save our texture, because we are going to render this, and rendering sometimes makes Blender crash. Hit F12 to render. And I see some mistake. So if you see these grass particles all blend through each other in some strange way, it wasn't visible in solid mode, so we still need to fix that. So it's all about the grass particle, so let's select that. Let's first go to object mode, select the grass particle or the object, make sure the overlays are turned off so they show. So we can see the selection. And with that selected, let's go to viewport shading. You see it's not doing it in solid mode, but it's doing it in viewport shading. And here in the materials tab we can go to the settings, blend mode, it's set on alpha blend. Let's add an alpha clip. Now the mask is either on or off depending on the alpha we set in the texture and the clip threshold we set in the settings of the blend mode. Okay, let's hit F12 to render again. Let's have a look. That's better. It's not perfect yet, but we'll fix that in the upcoming lectures. That's it for this lecture. Pretty long, but I think it was worth it, okay? Bye bye.